Skyspark, and they're getting better at running Axon, but they may or may not have any knowledge of Niagara data. I think is one of the reasons why our driver isn't being used more often right now, and it's one of the things I think if we do implement, it will kind of clear another barrier to entry, because there's so many advantages for the Niagara user. When we built it, we really built it thinking that this was primarily going to be adopted by the Niagara community to work within Skyspark, and since they're more familiar with Niagara, they would be more adept at NeQual and those sorts of things, and not real good at Axon. So now we have the reverse use case where we have people who are really good at Axon, don't necessarily know a lot about Niagara, and need to have that workflow work just as well as we've created on the other side. So it's, as Jonathan said, it's more about just having people request it, and then it gets into the dev plan and we can get it there.
I would be most interested in nav, and right after the JSON output.
Or so right now the JSON output, it's a little tricky just because, you know, Zinc is a super nested thing, so you'll have a super nested JSON possible response, and there's currently utilization of the project Haystack open source as the core, which does not necessarily implement JSON everywhere. So it would be additional effort to everywhere that you're turning out to, okay, now convert to JSON. That's a larger effort than the nav. The nav is a couple of days, the JSON for every possible request, every possible configuration to keep up with the current Haystack protocol. It might be a little more involved to go through every single one of those and make sure that it's compliant. But it's doable, just hasn't been done.
And I think you want to update the 2.0 to 3.0.
What's that?
The output. Right now it says version 2.0 the output.
Haystack.
Haystack 2.0?
Mm-hmm.
Is it Haystack 3.0 at this point? Because right now it's that.
If I go to the spec, and I looked at the spec for the first time, I think like 2 weeks ago, so I'm super experienced. Okay. But in the spec, it always says, those shall return version 3.0.
Okay, so that could be a change, and I can double check the Project Haystack download. No, not the Project Haystack site, but rather the Project Haystack open source code base to see if that's been updated. If that's not been updated, I can put that into that queue to get that updated so that it propagates out everywhere.
Yeah, so where are you at on syncing tags in the supervisor to tags into JSONs?
I would say the development for that is probably 60 to 70% complete, but it's not fully ready at this point. So that development has been started. It hasn't just not been taken to production release yet.
So is what's driving that Tritium's vision of virtualizing graphics?
Which the tag-to-tag syncing?
Yeah.
The tag-to-tag syncing is more just so you can do integration to JSON and don't have to redo it at the supervisor, and so you can do any kind of other analytics with the same kind of tagging scheme as far down to the edge as you want. So if somebody's going down to a site, does all their work, does all their tagging, then you come up to the supervisor, all that tagging is gone, right? If you bring through Niagara Network, all you're going to lose all those tags. So if you have one Haystack driver connection up to your Skyspark, maybe you want to run your analytics up here in a Skyspark installation, you've lost all that tag work that your installer did at the supervisor. You'd have to re-tag it again. So having that two-way sync to JSON, station to station, you have one tag here, and you can now decide, does that singular on-site JSON talk to Skyspark directly, or does it talk to supervisor and the supervisor talks to Skyspark? A combination of both. It's kind of left up to you, to the architecture at that point. But by not having that tag sync from station to station, you lose your ability to have somebody do the work at the tagging at the edge and have also retain that at a supervisor level for any kind of other higher level analytics or monitoring.
Or, yeah, right. Two use cases we've seen of this just recently was to actually connect down to the JACE level, right? But all the tags are living up in the supervisor, wouldn't make sense, plus all of those Haystack connections. But
Not to mention there's 30 Jasons.
yeah, as I mentioned, there's 30 days. I mean, it's not, but if there were, I think part of it didn't understand how much data that you bring into the supervisor. I think once they found that out, I'm sure they didn't need it. But you could see in some cases where you wanted to go down the JACE, you wouldn't be able to do that unless you were able to move those tags between your supervisor and your JACE. Then the other use case that just recently came up from a contractor. They want to be able to run Skyspark as they install each JACE, right? And so, but the extra effort to then go tag at the JACE and then re-tag at the supervisor when it all gets up there, it's a real pain. So if they were able to tag at the JACE, install Skyspark on a laptop, run their analytics, they move on to the next JACE, and then they can just keep tagging basically at the JACE level, and then it's all going to come back up to the supervisor when they're done. So
I think, as Jonathan said, this was at 70% developed when we first released the module. But as Jonathan said, when the demand is zero, we just haven't completed it. But it is something he could complete. When we drive the demand with our projects, he gets on it right away, but we haven't had that need either, and mostly because we're tagging at the JACE level, and we don't use supervisors per se. We take our data directly from JACEs directly to Skyspark, right? So we're not having that requirement to really have those tags in the supervisor. And so depending on how you architect your environment will change your needs. And so when we changed the way we architected our projects, it changed the need for us to have him complete that build. Did you guys talk licensing at all and connectors and device connections and all that?
we have not. There was a question, Mark, you had a question about the licensing model.
The number of connections.
With regards to connections.
Yeah, so we are changing, in an effort to, fill the market need, which is getting data in and out, back and forth between Niagara 4 and Skyspark. We're changing the licensing model to basically a free version, which will give you essentially all of the Haystack capability, except you won't be building a separate tag database. You'll be working natively with Niagara 4 tags and Skyspark. And then we'll have advanced functionality that will be a pay-for functionality. And that will include things like in Niagara subscribing to Sparks and turning them into Niagara alarms and those sorts of things that are more for the Niagara community who maybe isn't super strong on Skyspark, or they have a user that's really familiar with the N4 user experience and they like the alarm management and alarm console through that, which there's a lot of people out there that do that. And so Skyspark can create a lot of Sparks, and then some of the advanced functionality the driver will allow you to subscribe to those Sparks on a 15-minute or 10-minute or an hour or every 4 hours, and then turn those into native N4 alarms that can then be managed and and treated just as any other Niagara 4 alarm. So there's other functionality that's in there as well, like scheduled outputs for taking your database directly, your data. So if I have a JACE that stores 10 days worth of history for every point that's integrated, and every 4 hours we're pushing that data directly into Skyspark, right? So that we have a 10-day buffer, but every 4 hours we're offloading it, or every 1 hour we're offloading it. So those kinds of things will be part of the advanced functionality. But the basic, passing data back and forth with tags and being able to run queries, that will be part of the free unlicensed version. and then it won't matter how many connectors you have if that's what you're trying.
And in this case, connector at what you're licensing on the Haystack driver will be a connection out to a Skyspark installation. So every device under the network is a connection that you're licensing. So in the case if you were want the tag sync from JACE Supervisor, you would need one connection for every JACE you were trying to bring up to that supervisor with the Haystack driver to preserve tags. And that would be...
Yes, it's almost not
They
complete.
just have to start.
It's about 70%.
Next release.
Yeah, next release. There's a company in Australia that has been working on the open source version for a while. I can tell you when we first started down this process, Jonathan started with the Haystack. What makes it difficult to just start clean and write the stuff that needs to be written? And all that stuff still exists, and it's still very functional for what is now Finstack. So when we looked at it, we just said there's so much stuff in here that is actually has nothing to do with Haystack. A lot of stuff that has to do with tooling to help J2's products, which is great. They built it, they supported it for a long, long time, and they've stopped innovating on it, developing on it, whatever, and now it's been taken over by a company in Australia. Our belief is that the open source product, there's not a big enough community. This isn't Unix or Linux. This is Haystack, and it's a very thin community when you really look at it compared to other open source IT-related type applications. And so the interest just isn't there for developers like Jonathan to go home and now dedicate another 4 hours of his day to contributing to open source Haystack. And so we believe that in order to have a rich driver that would be continually developed on, that you need some organization behind it that's doing it for a purpose other than just being open source. And not being afraid to admit that, hey, we're building this for a profit in some cases. Now, even though ours is $100, it's still free versus $100. And I don't have to go very far. I can just go into the Kodaro room and talk to the developers and ask them which one they're going to try first. And they will bang their head for 1,000 hours against the wall to get that free one to work before they'll spend $100 to get the one that doesn't work.
It's not about spending the $100. I mean, you have to get the signature, you have to get the purchase order.
You're absolutely right in a large organization, yeah, but even these people who could just pull out their credit card would still use the free one first. And so that's why we've got to overcome that by getting a fully capable, fully functional version of ours out there for free. And so that's really why we're looking at it, because if we look at the forum posts, and Haystack is crashing my JACE, right? And they're posting it on Sky Foundry's forum. They're posting it on Haystack's forum. Who's responsible to fix that? And who's responsible to help them? Well, there's a community out there of Haystack people who may know the answer. They may not, And so since there's nobody is owning it, it becomes very difficult. In the Linux community, Jonathan does a lot of development on Linux. He's done a lot of development in Docker. He's done a lot of development in Ubuntu Core Snappy, which is a very, very young version of Ubuntu Core, right? For some Linux, there's a tremendous amount of documentation and help out there that's been contributed by thousands and thousands of developers. For Ubuntu Core, how much is there?
Oh, documentation?
Yeah.
Oh, it's almost on a distance.
And how much developer information is out there?
You have to go to IRC chat to get any help.
Exactly. So these are new products like this. The guys that are contributing to open source products, it's things that have the scale of Ubuntu Core, and backers of Dell and HP and Canonical and fill in the blank with the next big company.
And I mean, who has the time and the energy to be the maintainer for an open source project?
Yes.
Because I think it's one of the more ungrateful jobs you can ever take.
Absolutely. You're signing up for free support forever.
And free abuse.
And free abuse, yes, absolutely. So we think that the right model is to do it this way, and to take feedback from guys like you to say, I need a couple more ops supported. You know, I want the nav. I want to be able to send it out in JSON. You know, those are the things that community needs to come back to us and say and let us know, because it's not things that can't be done. It's use cases that we haven't needed, right? But also we've approached this purely from having a high degree of Niagara expertise and not needing to worry about not knowing the equal, right? But there's a big community who doesn't know the equal, who's going to know Axon really well. So the use cases just need to keep coming, and we can, you know, make sure that gets on the roadmap.